Hello and welcome to the Warhammer YouTube channel. Today we'll be talking about Warcry, the new skirmish combat game set in the Age of Sigmar universe, and we'll be specifically talking about the Iron Golems faction and how to use math to help come up with a better starting list to work off of. So let's get into it. Okay, this faction is a little bit simpler. So in my previous faction rundowns, I've started with discussing the overall aspects of the warband and the leader options, and then I talk about the troop options. But in this faction, as well as a lot of these other starting chaos factions, we only have one leader to choose from. So I'm just going to kind of run through the spreadsheet here and discuss it along with the warband as a whole at the same time. And then we'll get to the good part, which is talking about the troop options. Okay, so what makes this warband different and what makes it the same? I think it's a pretty good beginner warband. It's not very, everything is pretty average. The prices for things are good. Everything for what you're spending on the points, everything's a reasonably good buy. There's no big things you need to avoid, or it's hard to make a really misconfigured warband with this faction, I think. But that being said, there's still some better options than others. One thing to note that jumps out at me is this really low critical ratio. And the critical ratio means how much damage the faction does with critical hits versus their normal hits. So if the average critical hit in this faction is 3.91 and the average damage being done is 2. So this is actually pretty low. I think it's the lowest I've seen so far. Most other factions are in the 2.25 range. Some high factions are in the 2.5 and above range. This mechanic helps capture the style of fighting, whether it's finesse or brute strength. So finesse warbands have typically low strength, and then they do a higher critical damage, so their critical ratio is higher and their average strength is lower. This particular warband tends to be kind of average strength, and there's a couple key fighters that have high strength and has a very low critical ratio. So they're trying to get consistent damage done more than getting rare high damage values done. So that's the overall aim of this warband, I think. And your one troop leader option, this Dominar, is 175 points, and he's pretty unspectacular. I'll go ahead and start scrolling. You can see he's strength 5, toughness 4, move 4, only has 3 attacks, which is a little low. That's going to make his damage output not anything to get super excited about. But you don't have any other choice. If you want to play this faction, you have to bring him. There's no sense stressing out about it. That being said, it's not a huge tax on you, right? If he was a very bad buy, a complete waste of points, that's something you need to think about when considering playing this warband, is that there's this tax of this very expensive, wasteful leader. So he's not that expensive, and he's a decent value for what he does. It's just he's not going to be one of your heavy hitters on the tabletop. Some other factions, the leader might be the best fighter on the table. That's not going to be the case with this faction. Your opponent might forget which of your characters is the leader if they're not very familiar with your faction, because he's probably just going to be a little bit unspectacular. Okay, and that being said, I'm going to hide the leader and not really discuss him anymore. So for the rest of this time, we're just going to be talking about the troop choices. So I'm going to start out talking about the Ogre Breacher, and then I'm going to discuss the specialty options, the Signifer, Drillmaster, Prefector, and then I'll talk about the Iron Legionaries and your 3 choices of those, and then I'll discuss the Armature. So let me I'll leave them all up on the screen. No need to hide everything. So the Ogre Breacher, he's an outlier here in the very elite tier when it comes to points. So 235 and 30 wounds, very expensive option. Let's see if he's going to be worth it. He's toughness 5 and notably a strength 6 attack. So this is the strongest attack that we have in the game. There's not many other fighters out there with a strength 6 attack, and so it's a very rare amount of strength. And if you look at the damage and critical, he looks super impressive. I see, people on the internet were getting very excited about this character and how much damage he can output. But you need to remember that all of this excitement needs to be tempered a little bit with this number right here. Only 2 attacks. Now, there's some abilities that can up that, but that's abilities that you need to spend and that you can't spend on other things. So as a base amount of damage, this guy is good, but he's not great. He is not a top tier damage dealer in this game currently. We'll see if the meta changes or any rule adjustments change, but as it currently stands, he's a good damage dealer, but not great. Okay. He has an okay value, points per wound. He is pretty much right in the average of the entire warband when it comes to just raw points per wound. He has 30 wounds, and that being said, being your only 30 wound option, he's probably a good idea to take, because there's something to be said for just having a lot of wounds and being able to just stay on the table, even if those wounds are a little bit expensive for the points and maybe your toughness is low or something. Just having wounds on the table is nice in this game, because it's going to take more turns for the enemy to kill you, and that's going to be more rounds of attacks that you can hit with your damage, and just so don't look too much into the spreadsheets. You're going to need at least one guy on the table with some wounds, because there's going to be unavoidable combat situations. You just need to throw somebody in, and they need to live for at least the opponent's turn and survive at the other end. So he's going to be able to do that with 30 wounds. Okay. So what we have here in the middle is the effective wounds. So I've tabulated this versus Strength 3 attackers, Strength 4 attackers, and Strength 5 attackers. I don't have a Strength 6 column, but since there is a couple other fighters with Strength 6, this is one of the few places that that might be relevant. But anyway, just to get a feel for how the number of wounds of that character is going to kind of translate. So this is a metric that's going to take into account the toughness of the character with the number of wounds and give you a feel for how long that character is really going to stay around on the battlefield. So what I've done is just average these 3 to come up with an average wounds, and this is just kind of assuming a roughly even distribution of Strength 3, 4, and 5 attacks in the game. That value might be wrong, but you get the idea. You can kind of get a feel for what warband you think you're going up against and see how you're going to perform. So how to read this is, if you had a warband that did, let's say, a maximum of 10 damage per attack, it would take 6 activations in a Strength 3 attack. It would take 6 activations of combat on average to defeat this Ogre Breacher. And if it was a Strength 5 attack, it would take on average of 5 attacks to bring down this Ogre Breacher. So you can see that number doesn't move massively as we increase in strength, because the Ogre Breacher is a toughness 5 character. So just get some feel. The math behind these numbers is a little complicated because of the way critical wounds work, and the way I've tabulated them is just an assumption that the critical ratio of the enemies is going to be 2. And like I said, the average that I've seen so far is around 2.25. So these numbers are actually on the conservative side, kind of like overestimating the amount of rounds of combat it would take to take down this this fighter. Okay. So let's see, his points per average wound, so the amount of points you're paying for the amount of durability on the tabletop, he's a pretty good buy. Like I said, he's a little bit above the average for the warband, and 4.27 is a pretty good value overall. So you're paying good value for his durability. And if we scroll over to the damage columns, what I have here is his damage output against Toughness 3, Toughness 4, and Toughness 5 fighters. And then once again, just assuming a roughly even distribution of those, which I don't think to be the case, but we'll just go with that for now. I've averaged those together, and that's his average damage. So he's doing an average of 6.67 damage per activation. And since he's obviously Strength 6, these values are all the same for him. So this is a good number. This is a good, solid amount of damage, and as you can see from the rest of the warband, he is your strongest attacker. But There's a lot of warbands. I think most of the other warbands I've come across so far have things that do more damage than him. So don't get too cocky with this fighter. You're good, strong attack, cheap wounds, but you are not the big punishment machine that I think it sounded like you were from reading Games Workshop's community articles. So the amount of price you pay for his average damage is on the high side. As you can see, in comparison to the rest of the warband, there's only a couple of things that are more expensive for what you're paying. So something to keep aware of. But that being said, I think he's a good buy for just for what he does. You're paying a good amount of wounds, and just like I think it's important to bring something with a lot of wounds, I think it's important to bring something that can dish out damage, and he is your best option for dishing out damage. And the fact that he's the two of those things at the same time makes him a pretty good threat for your opponent. So he will be targeted. He'll be kind of a distraction Carnifex, if you can imagine that. Okay. So Ogre Breacher, big significant finding. He's a good damage dealer, but not great. The next three options are elite infantry choices, and there's no restriction on how many of each you can take. So I'll just start out by just talking about the Signifer really quickly. And I like the Roman army theme with this warband. It's pretty neat, and I think it kind of reflects the fact that their leader isn't a super spectacular fighter. It's just kind of a bit more average, kind of blends in with the rest of the warband. This warband's about kind of an average, it's like kind of feels like an actual military unit out there, where the differences in people are a bit more close than everybody's just supporting one big superhero champion, with the exception of the Ogre Breacher, of course. So the Signifer, he's okay. There's not much to say about him. Pretty average across the board. A little pricey on his points per wound, but he is, toughness 4, so it comes out pretty average for the warband in terms of points per wound. And he has, I believe, 15 wounds. Yeah, all three of these elite choices are 15 wounds, which isn't amazing. There's a lot of other elite infantry in the game with more wounds than that, so don't throw these guys' lives away too carelessly. So his average damage output is on the slightly lower side, but it's a nice price for it, and he's pretty much the exact middle option of the warband, the perfectly average choice. So the Icon Bearer rune he takes, he's a perfectly average choice as far as infantry goes. I'm going to hop over to the abilities tab. You can see his ability. It's a triple, so it's a little pricey, and all it does is add 1 toughness to fighters while they are within 6 inches of him, it's okay. It's going to help a little bit on the durability. I don't think toughness is as great of a stat as some people think it might be when you read the fighter card. As you can play with the spreadsheet yourself. You can adjust those numbers, and I think the number of wounds the model has ends up being a more important metric overall for talking about durability. So toughness will help, but it's not going to be a game changer. So you can bring him as a little bit of diversity. I would definitely never double up on a Signifer. Just one is enough, and not even a requirement. Okay, so the next two, I will compare and contrast the Drillmaster and the Prefector. So the Drillmaster is your only option for move 5, and every point of move in this game is kind of like a next tier up, because you get 2 moves per turn you could make. So this is a movement 5 character versus a movement 4. The movement 5 is going to be moving a good bit faster and clearly not only outpacing this warband, but since move 4 is the average across most warbands, he's going to be able to outrun a lot of enemies, and that can be important depending on your scenario objectives, is chasing things down or running away from things. So very important stat there. So we'll see how the rest of them compares to see which one of these we should buy, because they're both 125 points and 15 wounds. Okay, so the Drillmaster comes with a club, and he also comes with a reach weapon. I think the bolas that have a 3-inch range. So that's really nice. 4 attacks on both of those, strength 4. The club has a slightly higher crit, but other than that, they're pretty similar. And the Prefector only does 3 attacks with the same 4 strength, but he has a 5 crit. So if you're familiar with my spreadsheet math here from the previous episodes, the number of attacks that you do is a way more important than this crit. So the fact that we're only off by 1 here in the crit, and our attacks are off by 1, you can see where this is going. This Drillmaster is going to be doing a lot more damage than the Prefector. Okay. And we'll see that play out here in just a second. Okay. All right, so the Drillmaster has 8.33 points per wound, and the actually, let me lock that column so we can. All right, so I've locked the column so we can see the name of the units as we're talking about them. So same number of points per wound, and so their durability should be the same across the board. They are pretty average when it comes to what you're paying for their durability. They're slightly on the more expensive side. Actually, I guess they're the most expensive troop option for what you're paying per durability. So just keep that in mind. Scrolling over to the damage, once again, this is the average damage against toughness 3, 4, and 5. The Drillmaster, the club weapon, does pretty decent damage. He's the second best damage dealer in the warband, and one of the best points per average damage in the warband. So that's really nice. This is the 3-inch range weapon right here. You can see, despite being 3-inch range, it's still pretty nice damage. It's still in that kind of elite tier of damage output. I would say lower elite tier damage output, but still very nice despite being 3 inches. And even if you only use that weapon, it would be a pretty nice point value for its cost. The Prefector does not stack up so nicely. You can see here, it's not as good of damage as the Drillmaster in the basic weapon, and all it has is the 1-inch weapon. It does not have access to that 3-inch weapon. That's not good. So it doesn't compare head on, and it doesn't have a 3-inch weapon option. Even the Drillmaster's 3-inch weapon option is not too much worse than the Prefector's 1-inch weapon. So it's really perplexing. So you might be wondering, well, maybe it has an awesome ability. Well, the Drillmaster has Berserker ability and the Prefector has Brute. Let's hop over to the abilities page. Okay. So first off, let's look at the Drillmaster's Berserker ability. This one, it's a quad, so it's very expensive, but this one is one of the rare area of effect damage abilities. So, if you had say you had 3 6s, you used a wild dice to make it 4 6s, you could damage every enemy fighter within 3 inches with 6 damage. So with that, you could potentially really punish certain enemies that are going to try to flood you. Say you got swarmed by a bunch of grots, you might be able to kill many of the grots in just one activation using this ability. So pretty nice ability there. Like I said, it is quad, so it's very expensive. Whether or not it's worth the points, it's debatable, but it sounds pretty cool. What does the far less effective melee option give? Let's see, so that the Brute gives the spine-crushing blow. So we add to the strength characteristic in the next attack action, add the value of this ability to the strength characteristic of the next attack action made by this fighter. Okay, so let's see if that works out. So let's give it the best case scenario here. Let's say it was a 6. So I'm just going to change this value in the spreadsheet here to 10. Okay, so even in the best case scenario, that Brute, you can see, best case scenario with 10 strength, he's still doing less damage than the Drillmaster. So that's proof right there. Even with his ability used in the best possible case scenario, he is worse than the Drillmaster. You can say just on average, but the rare case where he's up against a toughness 5 enemy versus these other cases, yes, he would do a little bit better, but There's a lot of ifs in there, a whole lot of ifs. It's a little bit few too many for me. So I just don't like the prefector at all. And we'll come back to that in the summary. But all right, moving on to the Legionary options. So we have 3 options here. We have the Legionary with the shield, just called an Iron Legionary with twin hammers, and Iron Legionary with bolas. So the Iron Legionary with the shield has toughness 5. The others are just toughness 4. The one with the bolas has a 3-inch weapon, so this kind of sounds like the Drillmaster, and we'll see if he's worth it. But his normal hammer, his 1-inch weapon, only has 2 attacks, and the Iron Legionary also only has 2 attacks. So these guys are a little bit hampered on their number of attacks, and obviously the guy with the 2 hammers, it looks like he has the best damage stats. So he's damage stat of 2 with 3 attacks. He'll probably have the best average damage. We'll see. Okay. Our price per wound is slightly the highest because the Iron Legionary is 80 points. This one's 70 and this one's 65. Yeah, they're all 10 wounds. So since they're all 10 wounds, the price per wound is obviously showing the more expensive guy is more expensive. But I think that's not the greatest stat. I prefer to look at the points per average wound, since this takes into account the toughness. And when taking into account the toughness, you see actually the guy with the bolas, the 65-point version, is the cheapest, because toughness just isn't that great of a stat. It doesn't move the needle in a huge fashion. So you have to make that determination for yourself if the shield is worth it. But it's not a huge factor. Really, the biggest factor here is against strength 4. You get a bit more durability, but these guys are all fairly equivalent what you're paying for the wounds. Okay. So let's take a look at their damage output. The regular Iron Legionary is averaging just over 2 damage per activation, which is not good. That's going to take you an average of 4 turns to kill 4 activations to kill a grot, and there's gonna be a lot of grots out there, so that's not great. The guy with the twin hammers is a little bit better, still not amazing, but enough to kill things. The Iron Legionary bolas, this is his 3-inch weapon. You can see it's a really terrible damage stat. This would take 5 rounds of 5 activations to kill a grot, and from 3 inches away. So, and this kind of matches up with my experience playing against this warband. Is that at first I was a little bit scared. I was like, oh no, these 3-inch weapons. But then when they wailed on me turn after turn after turn and just didn't get much done, I stopped really caring about them and didn't really have a problem. So this his regular weapon matches up the same with the Iron Legionary. So yeah, it's hard for me to see the justification for the Iron Legionary with bolas, just because since his special ability is doing this damage from range, and that damage that he's doing from range is really terrible, and it's not even that great of a range. If this was an archer, with a 12-inch range or something, this is in line with what we see with the other ranged combat, kind of non-elite ranged combat, and that's kind of fine. But for 3 inches, I don't know. This is a tough sell for me, and the price you're paying for that damage is quite high in comparison to the rest of the warband. You can see he's the second worst price per average damage in the warband, and the guy with the twin hammers is a pretty surprisingly good value for points per average damage done. He does an okay amount of damage for a low tier infantry, and he's relatively cheap. So depending on how you're using those two, the guy with the shield, if you absolutely need a little bit more tabletop durability out of your units, you could go with the Iron Legionary. I could see a justification for that. Or if you wanted the option of potentially one day killing an enemy fighter, you might take guys with the twin hammers. Okay. And I don't really see a justification for the bolas. You could write to me with your opinions on that or whatever, but the numbers don't show it, and he doesn't have any special runes that are going to make up for his deficiencies in the combat department. And that leaves us with the last option is the Armature. This is the little Chaos Dwarf. He is 90 points, so he's still in that sub 100 point cheap infantry category. The only problem with him, and we'll see across the board, is his move 3. Now this isn't a warband, so like compare it with the Iron Jaws that are move 3, then they have the Wah ability that helps you kind of get over that move 3. Certainly every warband has access to the Rush ability. It's a double that can add 1 to their move characteristic, but you don't want to have to be wasting a double every single turn on this guy. So just something to be aware of, that he is quite slow and you don't have a lot of tools under your belt to compensate for his slowness. But literally everything else about him is great. He is, for the price you pay, he is not bad value on his price per wound, not bad in the points and the price per average wound when you figure in his toughness. He's right down the middle of your warband. But for a sub 100 point infantry unit, he's doing, low tier elite levels of damage. So your price per average damage on him is the best in the entire warband. So good damage dealer, cheap damage dealer. Only problem with him is he's slow. So I like him, and I think as long as you have some Drillmasters that can move fast and other things that can fill the board, I think there's no problem with the Armature at all, and he's a nice addition. So I think let's move on to our overall MVPs and some list building ideas. You don't have any choice on the boss, so there's no point in talking about it. You just have to take him. He's not a problem. I think my MVP will be the Drillmaster. I like the Drillmaster, and if I had to give a second MVP, which I will because I can do whatever I want, it would be the Armature. So Drillmaster and Armature, I think, are kind of clear favorites here, just in terms of, since this is a spreadsheet-based analysis, they end up looking very good on the spreadsheet, and particularly the Drillmaster, because I think he's got this move 5, which is going to be clutch. He's got the 3-inch range, which is going to be very nice, and he's meant to match up and be you're supposed to make a choice here between the Drillmaster and Prefector, and he just wins that choice so easily that I might as well I could just delete this row. I'm at least going to hide this row right now, because there's no point in that stupid Prefector being in this spreadsheet at all. He does not compare to the Drillmaster. Okay. So that's my 2 MVPs. When I'm talking about making a list, you're going to need to bring an Ogre Breacher. Even if you don't like it, if you don't think he is worth the points or whatever, you're going to need to do it, because there's going to be times when you need to kill something and he's your only really good damage dealer. Like I said, and I'm using the term good, not great. Like I said, there's better damage dealers out there that are great. He's good, and he's your only source of high value wounds. I don't know if I would go so far as doubling up on the Ogre Breacher, but at least one should be included in every warband. And I don't think that's a hard sell for you. If you chose this warband, you probably chose it in part because of the Ogre Breacher, or maybe because of the Armature. So Ogre Breacher should be in your warband. Drillmaster should be in your warband. I would probably recommend 2 Drillmasters. I don't see why you wouldn't. You could take a Signifer if you want, just for his ability. He's not a bad, and you're not wasting points by taking him. He's a good value. Whether or not you take the Shield Legionaries or the Twin Hammer Legionaries just depends on your strategy. Like, if you want to take a lot of Drillmasters, maybe 3 of them, and have Shield Legionaries there to provide a front line of defense while you take shots at people from a couple inches away with the Drillmaster, that could be valuable strategy. Otherwise, I think I kind of like the Twin Hammers a little bit better. They're cheaper and they do more damage, and you're not really giving away enough in terms of wounds. Like I said, the toughness stat isn't as effective as I think maybe the game designers hoped or something. So I don't know if this one value moving up here is worth 10 points for me. So, especially at the expense of more damage. So I think I like the Twin Hammers better just on a pure spreadsheet, but that's going to go with your strategy. Your strategy, I don't see why you would include the Bolus. If you want to do 3-inch range attacks, take another Drillmaster. Don't. These guys do not seem to be worth it. And the Armature, I would consider doubling up on these guys as well. So consider doubling up on Drillmasters and Armatures. They're nice. You can bring a couple of them. Their slow speed isn't really going to hold you back as long as you have things like Drillmasters, and as long as most of your warband is in that move 4 range, you're not going to really feel the ill effects of a slow movement quite as much. So I think with that, if there's any suggestions on what warband you want me to do next, after I do the Untamed Beast, which will be next, but after that I have a little bit more flexibility, so I could continue doing the Chaos, or I could circle back. I think there's been a suggestion already to do some of the Death factions, so I might do those after the Untamed Beast. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Hopefully you have some ideas on how to build your first list using math. Thanks.